Hello and welcome to this new episode of I Dream of Wise. Sometimes in our Wise projects, it's not uncommon to duplicate a whole structure that we have created in order to have more freedom when it comes to mixing. So, for example, we might want to achieve a different sound for footsteps in case they're played by the player or in case they're played by an NPC. And maybe if that NPC is a friendly NPC, we want it to sound different than when the NPC is from an enemy faction. The same thing goes for weapons. If an enemy shoots at me, I want the mix to be different than if a friendly NPC is shooting at the same time. So that's why sometimes we have to duplicate stuff. But the thing is that I really don't like to duplicate stuff because it's hard enough to maintain a Wise project. The moment you start duplicating very big structures, it gets even harder. So I will show you the way I'm facing this issue in the Wise project I'm working on right now. It's still a work in progress, so I'm still figuring out the downsides of the system, so it's not fully tested and foolproof. But I think it's a quite interesting approach, so I'm going to show you. So as I was saying, we're talking about footsteps. So this will be our main actor mixer for footsteps. And it will be routed to a bus called footsteps. Okay, so for these purposes, let's just create a very simple sound. We'll just create some white noise. A tone generator, minus 16 will be fine. And we'll set it to loop. The only RTPC we will really need from code is an RTPC called actor, let's say. This RTPC will have a value of 0 in case the player is emitting the sounds and a value of 1 for NPCs. In my opinion, it's always better to have an RTPC rather than a switch group for this kind of things, because you can get a switch from an RTPC, but not vice versa. So yeah, let's get back to our footstep system here. Let's assume that this was a very complicated setup with a bunch of different surfaces, maybe dependent on the weight of the shoe that you're wearing, or maybe depending on how heavy you are, how heavy your armor is. I don't know, a bunch of different parameters. The first thing we're going to do is to route these footsteps to two different buses according to the RTPC called actor. So the way to do that is just by creating two auxiliary buses called footsteps player and footsteps NPC. And we will make use of the user-defined auxiliary sense. So footsteps player will be user-defined auxiliary sense number 0. And for the NPCs, we will use the user-defined auxiliary sense number 1. So in order to make this routing work, we will go to the RTPC tab of the Footsteps actor mixer and instantiate two curves that will control the send volume to these two auxiliary buses, according, of course, to our actor RTPC. So this will look like this. And the other one will look like this. Okay, so this is how they look together. When the actor RTPC is set to 0, so again, 0 means player. When the actor is set to 0, we will send the signal just to the user-defined auxiliary send 0. When it's set to 1, the footsteps will play only from the auxiliary send 1. So let's give it a quick test on a mixing desk. We will drag in the whole footsteps bus and then the player and then the NPC auxiliary buses. Now we don't see the meters for the footsteps, and that is because it doesn't have any effects in it. So let's just quickly instantiate a gain effect that is not really doing anything. And as you can see, yeah, the meter will show up. Okay, so let's just play the white noise we created. As you can see, the routing is working, but we have a problem because we're still sending the dry signal of this white noise to the main bus, which is footsteps. And we don't want to do that. And in order to avoid this, the best way to do it is to mute the output bus volume. A little bit about the signal flow in Wwise. The voice settings are what comes first. So voice volume, pitch, voice low pass, and voice high pass. Then there are the sends, game defined and auxiliary defined. And after the sends come the output bus settings. So the moment we mute this output bus, we're not really touching anything about the user defined sends. So let's go back to the mixing desk. And as you can see, this is peaking at around -19, and this is -19 as well. So it means that we're only sending one copy of the signal to the footsteps audio bus. So this is great because this allows us to instantiate, for example, some meter effects here, both on the player and the NPC auxiliary buses. So I just created an RTPC for the meter plugin for the player's footsteps. And now we will create another one for the NPC footsteps. And they both have a range from -48 to 0. So we can go back here and assign those RTPCs to our meter plugins. And now we can use these RTPCs for all kinds of purposes in our game. So for example, if we want the volume of the NPC footsteps to attenuate when the player is walking, we can simply do that by driving the bus volume with our new footsteps player meter RTPC. So we can do something like this. Of course, this is very rough. Like, for example, it would have been better maybe to get the RMS here instead of the peaking value and to have quite a slow interpolation so that the effect is less obvious. Anyway, this is just one thing, and it's not the main thing I wanted to show you. What I really like doing when mixing sounds for a game is to consider a set of parameters that depend on where the listener is looking at and if the NPCs are looking at you, stuff like that. So I really like to play around with parameters like emitter cone and listener cone. I already created them in this project. Of course, they go from 0 to 180 and they're bind to their built-in parameters. The thing is that we can't really use them in here in the RTPC tab of the footsteps actor mixer because they would affect both the player and the NPC footsteps. So how do we do that? Is there a way to do that? Well, yes, because we can still drive the send volumes with these RTPCs. And if we drive the send volume 0, we will affect the volume of just the player's footsteps. While if we affect the send volume 1, we will only alter the volume of the NPC's footsteps. So let's, for example, use the listener cone to emphasize the volume of footsteps the moment you're looking at them. So the way to do that would be to create a curve that looks something like this one. The footsteps are below you, right? So assuming that the camera position is on your head and that you're looking forward, the listener cone, which is the angle between the direction you're facing and the position of the emitter, will be around 90. So this curve won't affect the footsteps. But if you start looking at them, the angle decreases until it goes towards around 0. And so we'll have a boost of 6 dBs on their voice volume. Let's say that we want them to be a little bit low pass when we look in the opposite direction. Can we do that? Well, yes, because we can also apply filters to auxiliary defined sends. So let's select the user defined auxiliary low pass filter 0 and use still the listener cone and create a curve that will filter only the player's footsteps when the player is looking upward, so in the opposite direction. The same thing we can do with the NPCs, of course. So we can, for example, boost the volume of the NPCs if we're looking in their direction, okay? Something like this. But we can also do something else. We can, for example, attenuate their volume if they're walking away from us. So the way to do that is to use the emitter cone instead of the listener cone. So this would be 0, and this would be something like -6. So just to verify all of this, let's test what we just did in the mixing desk. So we're now listening to the player's footsteps because the actor RTPC is set to 0. Now let's adjust the listener cone, and we can hear the boost when we are looking at the footsteps. And we can hear also the low pass when we're looking away from our footsteps towards the sky. Now let's switch to the NPC footsteps and play around with the emitter cone. If the NPC is walking away from us, he will sound quieter. Let's see if this emitter cone has any effect on the player. It has no effect at all, because that's what we did. We didn't set any RTPC curve that is driven by the emitter cone for the player's footsteps. So I think this is a very powerful system, but of course there are some drawbacks. And one of them is the fact that you're forced to use only one attenuation setting. You can't select 2 different attenuation settings for player and NPCs. But if you think about it, you will always know that more or less your feet will play from around 1 meter 60, 1 meter 70, 1 meter 50 from the listener position, which is most likely to be your head. So with that in mind, you can create an attenuation curve that will sound appropriate when the distance is around those values. So you could set these attenuation settings to work fine for the player when in the range of like 1 to 2 meters, let's say, and to work great for the NPCs when above 2 meters. It's very unlikely that you will hear any footsteps from the NPCs in a range that is closer to your footsteps. Another cool thing about this setup is that it doesn't really alter your workflow for surround mixing. So for example, we can still have different center percentages for the player and for the NPCs. And we can just do that by creating a curve here, still depending on the actor. And that curve would look something like this one here. So when the actor value is 0, it means you're the player, and we have 60% of center percentage, while the NPCs wouldn't use the center speaker at all. But what you could do is also going into the channel configuration of the auxiliary buses and edit those. So for example, we could force the player's footsteps to play in a 3.0 configuration. So to only use the front speakers, left, center, and right, and have the NPC use like a quad setup, so left, right, and the surrounds. So let's take a look at how that looks like in the mixing desk. So this is the player. It's using quite a bit of the center channel and left and right. No surrounds at all, as you can see from the master audio bus meter. If we go to the NPC footsteps, so as you can see, the NPCs are using the surround channels when they're close enough and their spread is big enough. But the player footsteps are never using the surround channels, no matter what. So, as I said at the beginning, I'm still exploring this kind of setup. So, maybe there are some things that I didn't consider about this, but I think it can be quite powerful and it can avoid a lot of complication that would come with duplicating your systems many times. One thing to consider is also that we currently have just player and NPC subdivision here, but we could also have player, NPC friendly, NPC enemies, and so on. So I hope you liked this video and I hope it was helpful for you. Please let me know if you use the similar setup in your projects because I'd like to know your experience with it. Thank you very much and see you next time.